Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. A very warm welcome to you all. My name is Mark Morley, and I'm delighted to be running another showcase webinar for the Good Governance Academy. As always, it's great to have so much interest in these events. We've had over 200 people register, which is a clear demonstration of how important digital security is, also how we're struggling to manage it. As always, please let us know where you're joining from in the chat window below, whether it's within South Africa or further afield. It's great to see where you're located. And if the weather is terrible, do let me know so I can share with you how lovely it is here in Cape Town today. Although you may tell from my eyes that the pollen count is also a tad high. While people continue to join, I'll share some tips for those not familiar with Zoom. If you can't see the control panel on your screen, press the Alt key on your keyboard. That will give you access to the chat box, the question box, and the reaction buttons. Our speakers love to see your reactions, so please do make good use of these during the event. If you have any questions, you can pop these in the question box, not the chat box, and I'll be happy to ask these during the Q&A session later on. And please do feel free to use the chat box to share your thoughts and experiences. It's always nice to hear how these topics resonate with you. You're also welcome to connect with people here, and I'll be sharing our LinkedIn details in the chat box shortly. For those who are not familiar with the Good Governance Academy, we're a non-profit organisation that was established by Professor Mervyn King back in 2019. We collaborate with universities, business schools, professional bodies, and other organisations all around the world to educate and empower leadership to lead ethical and sustainable organisations. We run webinars on current topics. And if you'd like to see what we have planned, please head over to our events page, which I'll post a link to in the chat window below. I'd also encourage you to join our mailing list and follow us on LinkedIn to be kept informed of forthcoming events. In addition to the webinars, we host colloquia twice a year. These are high-profile events which have been attended by thousands of people, and the output of these is shared with over 5 million professionals through our support member network. Our next colloquium, which is number 12, will be held on the 7th of November. We also run these showcase events to promote courses which the Academy has endorsed. The endorsement program is available to any organisation, and it involves a robust assessment to ensure the highest standards are maintained. The courses that we endorse are those we feel address business critical issues and provide users with current and relevant content, and also that are internationally applicable. Endorsement is available for courses of all formats, online, in person, and hybrid. So if you have a course you'd like to put forward, please visit our training page or drop me an email and I'll include our details below. Anyone who registers for an endorsed course through the GGA will receive our certificate of attendance, and these certificates are CPD accredited by the GGA support members. And on the topic of certification, anyone attending today is entitled to receive a certificate of attendance. So on to today's showcase and Executive Education Online. This is the third course that they put forward for endorsement, and like the other two, forms part of their Executive Leadership series, all of which have a strong focus on governance. And like the other two, this course is also aimed at executives and sponsors and change leaders, and has been written in non-technical business language. The course, as the title suggests, focuses on security, but unlike others which jump straight into technology and frameworks, the approach here has been to take a higher level view and consider the threats you can't fix just with a firewall, namely the people element. So I'd like to hand over now to our guests, Gary and Jimmy, to introduce themselves, and then we can dive straight into the topic before looking at the course itself. So Jimmy, if I could hand over to you first for an introduction.
Sure, welcome, and thank you for inviting me to this course. So my name is Jimmy Heschl. I'm saying hello from Salzburg, Austria. I'm the global head of digital security of a company whose brand you might have heard before, so Red Bull. I'm working now here, I'm taking care of security since almost 10 years. Before that time, I used to work as a consultant and advisor in Big Four companies, so doing financial audits and also convincing the financial auditors on the risk and impacts of security of information processing at all. And during that time, I created a weird hobby and also joined ISACA board in Austria. And this weird hobby is related to a governance framework on the IT side called COVID. This is also where I met Gary, I think more than 20 years ago. And since then, we work a lot together. And it's really a big pleasure to have this webinar today with you, Gary.
Thanks, Jimmy. Gary?
Yeah, thanks, Jimmy. Yeah, I was thinking, Jimmy, I think it goes back so far that I remember in the early days, you looked so young. Do you remember, it was a joke that in the US you weren't allowed into the bars? We made jokes for this for years, you know. So yeah, look, and Jimmy and I both share a passion for something that's always been my main interest, which is this challenge around technology in general, for people who are not technically savvy, you know, or think they're not technically savvy, and the gap between technical guys and business people. And you know, I'm the owner of, well, Executive Education Online is a new brand that we've created. The company is IT Winners, which I've been running for 20-something years now. And it's a combination, I guess, of my life story of trying to, through consulting, through actual hands-on work in the earlier days, and then running certification training courses, trying to educate people on this whole mission of business to IT connection. And then during COVID, after a lot of thinking and some personal considerations, decided to focus entirely on education, focus entirely on leaders, and try and leverage the opportunities that new technologies provide. Because now with new technologies, we can do the education in a much more slick manner than the old school PowerPoint and even LMSs. So this is a bit of a breakthrough. And so that's what we're kind of concentrating on here. And digital security being, look, and I go back also in my earlier career, I was in charge of the consulting group of what was then Europe's leading computer security company, a company called Zergo. And I was surrounded by extreme experts. It was a really challenging job for me because I was overseeing this group of people who were, you know, the only thing they did was one thing. So like a firewall expert or a crypto expert or a policy expert. But in the work that we were doing, I felt every time that the actual organizations we were helping were not really going to grasp this and do it for themselves. Anyway, I could go on for a long, long time, but that's where I'm coming from in terms of passion. So back to you, Mark.
Great. Well, thanks, gentlemen. Let's dive straight in. Just a reminder, though, for anyone, if you want to ask questions, please pop them in the question box. Otherwise, you can raise your hand, and we'll stop during the event, so you can ask your questions live. So we've seen, I'm sure everyone's seen the headline bandied around a lot recently that cybercrime is expected to cost the world $10.5 trillion annually by 2025, which is a number most of us can't compute. I think this mind-boggling amount illustrates the need for us to take a different approach to security. So with the financial impact of cybersecurity growing exponentially, how can executives take a primary role in embedding security into the core of their organization's risk management strategies? I can ask you first, Gary.
So, yeah, so as Mark said, look, I mean, you might think, well, I suppose you could argue that if that's the amount of loss that's likely to happen, we're not doing this properly. It's ridiculous, actually. And you know, and besides the so-called criminal losses, there's the just plain damn stupid losses, you know, where people just do things in a silly way, or people at work who are just upset, you know, and cause a bit of harm because they're frustrated. And then on top of all of that, you've got the investments that go into this are huge. And is that investment actually paying back? I'm not sure, you know, because a lot of the investment focuses on technologies. If those technologies are not managed well or even chosen correctly, it's money down the drain, like, unfortunately, like a lot of IT initiatives are. So obviously, you know, from a leadership point of view, it's back to the basics, even the things that Jimmy and I were trying to promote 20 odd years ago with COVID, that, you know, making correct investment decisions, challenging what people are proposing to do, managing third parties in a way that's, you know, taking due care, because there's a lot of money at stake here. And then, you know, when it comes to actual operation, keeping an eye on things and asking questions to make sure it's being done correctly. Too often, I think they just let go and, you know, hand over to either the expert that they've hired, and they would argue, and this used to come up over and over again, well, look, I've hired an expert, you know, don't point the finger at me. I've got the best person I could find, you know, that's not good enough. And of course, there's a lot of organizations, probably the majority of organizations, because the majority of organizations are not big, who have no one. And so they trust the third party, but they're interested in making money. So, you know, it's ownership, but it's also, as we'll probably discuss further, realizing you don't have to be a technician to manage this. In fact, it's better not to be.
Yeah. Thanks, Gary. Jimmy, is there anything you'd like to?
I just can support it. I think it's embracing the topic of security and just accepting that, yes, since years we heard a lot that digital risk, cyber risk, security risk, or whatever you call it, is one of the key risks in is it the Allianz barometer? Is it the World Economy Forum? Everyone's talking about there will be a big risk. And I think the numbers are growing. It's now at 1.7 trillion. A few years ago, different numbers. I wonder if who comes up with these numbers at all. I think they are made up artificially. But I think it's just accepting that this is a global risk, that this is something we just need to address. We shouldn't just leave it in the hands of some experts or some people who claim to be experts. I think there has to be the start of a discussion and starting our first starting point is to ask the right question. So what is it about? What are we doing? Where are the big pain points? Where are the roadblocks? What can we do? What should we do about it? Rather than taking the usual route of just as Gary said, hiring an auditor and obtaining a certificate and say, I've done everything. That's the wrong way. That's the wrong solution.
Yeah, absolutely. In the course, which is broken down into three modules, under doing things the right way, you talk about what can go wrong and you highlight insider threats. Now, a recent Verizon report showed that insider threats, whether due to negligence or malicious intent, accounted for 1/3 of all their data breaches. So clearly, executives cannot afford to ignore internal risks when planning their security strategies. Given that the significant portion of data breaches are caused by insiders, what steps can senior executives take to foster a culture of security awareness and vigilance across all levels of the organization?
Well, there are few steps, so and a few with a very good impact and a few with little. So there are some which I always call the folklore events, where you just publish documents and they are then on the intranet and accessible just in case an auditor asks. Or just go to the coffee kitchen and have a talk and have a look. And how important is the data that we process? How well do we protect it? How likely is it that someone outside our company makes benefit or use of our data? So rather than talking about data breaches and which section and which law will be broken sooner or later, it's what's the impact for the organization? Why should we take care of? Why is it important for us? And to communicate that and keep the communication going. Similar as we take care of our funds. We don't just spend the money like crazy. We really, in a very diligent way, only invest where we see a return. And the same goes with our information, with our data, with our security controls, all these things. Are they creating a benefit? Are we doing actually the good things?
Yeah.
Mark, maybe just to add something on this, because we paid a lot of attention to this in the course, and actually in all the courses, which is this thing that's become a very common sort of topic recently, which is the so-called psychological safety. Meaning, when you're at work, you feel able to speak out. And look, this is often a challenge because some people worry about their boss. Some people worry that it might cause problems for a colleague. And if they have no opportunity to speak up, then a lot of these things that could have been caught will be hidden and lost, So in extreme cases, it's like having a, what do you call it? I can't think of the expression now, where you can secretly, whistleblow, yeah. But generally, if the culture is led, and this is back to leadership as well, obviously, if the leaders promote an atmosphere of improvement and promote an atmosphere of openness and an atmosphere of helping one another, people are more likely to mention things that they worry about, that might even be a small weakness, but I reckon from what I've seen in the past, is the small, silly things coupled with someone who's unhappy or simply sloppy, that opens the door for someone, or they're sadly, some people are under pressure, socially. They're having financial problems. They've got problems at home, and they're tempted. And look, Jennifer, my daughter, who's an HR manager, this is also something that comes up all the time, that the HR people should be much more aware of their people's needs, and empathetic and sympathetic. All these cultural things, play a huge part. Over the years, I've become more and more convinced that all of these cultural factors are 9/10 of our problem. And leaders are the ones who can make the big difference by supporting them, by getting their HR people to get much more aware of what's going on with the people, So it's another aspect of that.
Thank you. In the section on doing things the right way, you mentioned that all third parties must be included in the management of risk. And a few years ago, there was a cyber attack that compromised multiple government agencies and corporations through a third-party vendor. Now, this incident demonstrated that even organizations with a strong internal security measure can be vulnerable through their supply chains. So with this increase in resilience on third-party vendors, which will only continue to increase, how can senior executives ensure that their entire supply chain is secure and that they have visibility over these potential security risks?
I think, again, there are two options to address this. One is the more formal, compliance-driven, folklore options to just obtain security reports and statistics which are based on just random numbers. I think the much better way is to sit together with the vendors, with the suppliers, with the business partners, and talk through the things. What is driving them? Why are they important? Why are they part of our value chain? They are not just third parties, and our connection is much stronger than just a contract. We work together as people. We work together as, hopefully, organizations with the same interest, with the same plans, and better manage this whole value chain rather than a list of security practices. And please avoid sending over questionnaires with hundreds of questions that these are randomly filled and then end up in the drawer. They don't help. They just make you compliant, not secure.
And Mark, in our other courses on good governance, aligned with the new standards and business relationships, I think, people have realized that there is, in the connected world, there's no such thing as a closed enterprise. I mean, we used to talk about the extended enterprise. The reality is that the relationships are everywhere, and some are critical and some are extremely important, and that example of that big issue recently, that's a key vendor for security. And so, the language we tend to use now is partnerships, shared objectives, openness. It's also a cultural thing, of letting go and trying to persuade the vendors to behave in that way as well. I used to think the vendors needed to take the lead, but actually I've convinced myself that it's the client who has to take the lead, to insist, because vendors are tempted to, go for, especially the people who start the relationship, the ones who want to make the sale, and are more interested in closing deals than extending the relationship sometimes. And good governance from the academy is all about this. It's all about good behavior by everyone, because it will make everyone in the end better and more successful. But so, yeah.
Is this better to set this up, I guess, from the start of the relationship rather than if you're
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. We've recently been doing some research on this for the content that we've been creating, and looking for those organizations. Look, ChatGPT has sped this whole thing up. Tell me who are the best organizations that have used relationships to improve their trust and things like security, and it comes straight back. And you can see there are organizations whose whole mantra is this way inclined. And those people, those organizations, not only have saved a lot of money, they've created more trust and are probably more likely to be sustainable, But organizations who ignore this gradually lose reputational trust and actually will not be executing things well. And And in the worst case, look, and I have to say there are some organizations that are in a bad position, unfortunately, through no fault of their own. And the public sector springs to mind, who tend to be taken for a ride because, and I've been in the middle of this many times, as a consultant, where the third parties think they're dealing with people who don't know what they're doing and think that they can get away with selling all kinds of things that aren't appropriate. So the public sector needs help. And the consultants need to be very, a little bit more attuned to this, I think, and helping to protect some of that interest. Yeah.
In the section on governance, which we've just been talking about, specifically there's a section that says this is what you'll need, and you talk about taking ownership, not only in setting the tone, but in terms of risk management, protection of reputation, which you discussed, and legal obligations. There's a growing trend in corporate governance, which is the focus on CEO and C-suite accountability in the event of major security failures. And just as an example, there's a massive breach at Equifax recently, and both the CEO and CSO resigned due to their mishandling of consumer data. Just wondering, what is the best way for the C-suite to safeguard themselves against these failures?
Do you want me to? Let me do something else, because look, and I use an analogy every time this comes up. And it was told to me way back by, I can't remember who, but it's taking ownership doesn't mean knowing what to do exactly or doing everything for yourself, but making sure when something isn't right, it gets dealt with, and you pay attention. It actually was Mervyn King, I think. I was actually sitting in an airport lounge in Johannesburg a long time ago when I first met him, and we were chatting about this. And he said, it's due care, it's diligence. And the analogy is, a parent and a child who feels sick. If your child's not well, you want to make sure they're dealt with correctly, And if you go to the hospital or you go to your doctor and you're not happy with what's being said, or you don't think you're being given enough attention, you do something about it, And you ask the questions to try and test whether whoever you're dealing with is taking you seriously and does seem to know what they're talking about. And, that's the analogy that I think, leaders need to be need to consider that they have to own the responsibility to get things done properly.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean being technically expert. It doesn't mean being the person who has to do the work, It's just overseeing and directing things in the best possible manner for the sort of health and well-being of their company or organization. It's when they let go. It's too often, as we said at the beginning, too often leaders with technology topics let go and delegate. And that's giving up responsibility.
Exactly. It's just assigning to CIO or people or some technical people, and especially in the case of a ransomware attack of a bigger security issue. I think it's very important to have trust in, taking this analogy of the hospital, into the doctors and all those things, but be there, take the overall accountability, make decision as needed. Sometimes that's hard decisions, but let the experts work. So I think that there's this saying in governance, so nose is in, but fingers out. I think especially in times of a crisis, that's very important.
Mm.
Okay, we talked about ransomware then. According to a recent report from the World Economic Forum, the ransomware attacks surged by something like 150% during the COVID pandemic, with attackers increasingly targeting high-value executives and holding entire business operations hostage. So as attacks target executives and critical business functions, what measures should senior leadership take to ensure that they're personally involved in building a resilient security strategy?
Well, I think that it's always the combination of the prevention, detection, and response whenever it comes to, I think, any risk. In the prevention, there are a lot of things to do, like backups and secure controls and all the things. They just have to be there, and they just need to be matured. I think this industry or this practice that's now 40, 50 years old, that's mature enough to just be adopted in the organization. Still, you can't ensure that you can prevent everything. So you need to be prepared that you detect and properly react. And I think from also from the reacting, from rebuilding systems, reinstalling everything to get the organization up and running. I think it's also very important to keep in mind that resilience within the organizations, without technology, without all the automation, just needs to be considered and trained and tested from time to time. So again, going back to this hospital, what if all lights go off in this very hospital where your kid is treated currently? And yeah, I think you hope that there are some experts who can then do some work, not just run around like a headless chicken. They do their job, even if some of the facilities and the infrastructure is not there. And same goes with automation and digitalization. Of course, your online shops should be more available than maybe other environments, because there is no plan B for those.
Right. Gary, would you like to add to that?
Not really. The only thing, and we don't really cover this much in the training, is I just wondered, I don't know, Jimmy, if you know the answer to this, and it's to do with sort of vulnerability side of security, which is making yourself being an organization that people would like to target. You know, so before any consideration of prevention and detection and so forth, it's making yourself open for this kind of an attack, because either you're not a very popular company, or people have made some sort of, you know what I'm saying? Is that part of this?
Yes, but I'm kind of doubting that attackers attack organizations, attackers attack technology, and if they find a way in, then they see who is that target and how much can I earn from that. So they're scanning the web for vulnerabilities, for technical vulnerabilities, and if they see an open door, like in real life, if you see an open door, you go in and then you see, okay, I can steal gold, money, or whatever. And if there's nothing, you just go out again. But you don't attack just the golden palaces.
True.
With the growing enforcement of regulations like the EU's General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, and increasing fines for non-compliance, senior leaders are being held accountable for the protection of customer data. So with regulators increasingly targeting organizations' leadership in the wake of security failures, how can executives ensure they're not only compliant, but kind of leading the charge in protecting sensitive data?
Mm-hmm. In a perfect world, the law should be your least problem. So protecting consumer data, protecting personal data, I think that's a duty of an organization at all. Only if it's enforced by law and then someone comes after you, should not play the trigger if you are a responsible businessman. So that's first of all. And I think all these laws, GDPR and all the things they have, they make sense. They are there to protect the people. It's not there to make the life complicated. And I think the least priority is to get hold of the regular or a random representative of an organization. But I think as every law, that's intended to go after those who don't behave properly and duly. And I think that's fine and okay, because if an organization just collects personal data and then sells them, maybe in a tax-free environment, that's the kind of people that law enforcement should go after. I think that's fine. That's okay.
Yeah, look, I think there's a couple of things here, Jimmy, that have exploded in recent years, which is, so you're absolutely right that, and I think most leaders hopefully would recognize that it makes business sense to protect data, I mean, company data, personal data in general, because even one incident could wreck the reputation for a long, long time. The temptation has been now with big data and mass handling of big masses of information to get competitive advantage through the intelligence of that data, and so it's a big temptation, and it can go wrong. And one of the things we emphasize in the course, and in fact in all the courses, is sort of breaking down the silos between the different aspects of an organization. So too often you get the risk guys in a corner, you get the IT guys in a big corner, sometimes even far away, deliberately. You get the compliance people in a corner, you get the legal people in a corner. And so when it comes to information, it's everyone's. I just think, we've got to get into this habit of leaders ensuring that they bring together all the elements that are needed and have a conversation together to get a sensible answer. If you don't have and going back to smaller companies, if you don't have all those people, and it's interesting, I'm presenting next month at a conference in Zambia, and it's a corporate governance conference, and most of the people who go there, because of the organization that's running it, are so-called company secretary types. And I'd never realized what a company secretary is supposed to do, actually. It sounds a boring title, but it's actually interesting. And listening to these people and the service this company provides, it's having one person whose job is to make sure these pieces of the jigsaw puzzle are pulled together. And what we're seeing is that this company secretary service is being given to the smaller companies to help them understand that. Because let's be honest, in a small company, you kind of, you haven't got all the expertise, you haven't got the time, you don't even think sometimes. And so I think sometimes these things slip through the net, and mistakes get made about taking due care, and then do the things that Jimmy is saying,
Yeah. So maybe now's a good time. We've been referencing certain areas of the course, and there's a lot, obviously, we've not covered, but I wondered if we could take a look at the course now and how it's structured. So maybe now's a good time to do that.
Let's see if I can do this. I'll try and share my screen now. Yeah.
And then maybe you can show how the course is organised, how it can be navigated. And we like you've tried to make it more consumable by using a cookbook principle. So that'd be good to see that.
Okay, I'm just trying to share now. It's a bit slow to react. Hopefully.
I'll let you know when we can see it.
I'm pressing share, but not a lot is happening. Let me try one more time. Hang on, did it work before? It's like I'm stuck. Oh, God. I don't know what's going on here, Mark. Can you force me out of sharing somehow, or how? I just can't get out of it.
And maybe she can.
Oh, here we go. Right, I'm out of it now. Let's try one more time. Sorry, guys. This is technology again.
If not, we can always come back to it later.
Right, I think that should now work.
There we go.
Cool.
You see that okay?
Yes.
Yeah, so as I said at the beginning, I spent, over probably 18 months looking into, first of all, the technologies available to improve the interface for learners and the whole approach to presenting information in an online class. And we homed in on what we now are doing, which is using what are called interactive ebooks. So it's not PowerPoint, it's not an LMS, it has and it's not lots of information. So the conclusion was that what we need is stuff that's digestible and somehow stimulating. And I can tell you, having to present classes in the past with like 300 PowerPoint slides that you somehow cram into 2 days as a trainer, very frustrating and really challenging and exhausting, And even on those slides, having complex diagrams and then associated with it a textbook maybe of 200 pages that you're supposed to read and learn. So the idea here is everything is visual, very, very few bits of text. Every page, I've turned off the audio, hopefully, it's not running. So the audio is not coming through, but when I turn page, and this is the beginning of the first section, which is doing the right things. And by the way, so the classes are all organized into 4 sections based on something that came out of the COVID experience, which is that governance really means doing it right and doing the right things, then doing them the right way, as Mark touched on, getting them done well, and then finally making sure the benefit of what you're trying to do has been realized. And so that's the way we've structured the classes. They're in 4 sections. This is the first one. And then if I click on next, it just flips to the next page. And if the sound was on, an audio would play, a short audio just explaining that page. And then it's a combination of videos, which Jimmy has done, and sometimes just an image. If I go to move forward like this, just to try and get the point across. And what we decided to do was avoid anything technical, not even words like project management. The number of times I've sat in a class trying to teach people, and then you get an argument, you know, the difference between project management and program management. I mean, does it matter really if we need to understand the basic principles, especially at the leadership level? So each page has an audio, which is at the bottom here, which runs automatically, and will be a combination of images, occasionally some text if we think it needs a little bit more careful explanation. It's organized according to what we call cookbook style. So each topic, which this one is security strategy, consists of, I go back to the beginning of this, it starts with, you can see on the left here, actually, the index of the content. It starts with here's how, which is simply, you know, this is like the recipe, the things that the most important fundamental steps that ought to be taken if you're a leader to drive the security strategy properly. What you need, which a bit like the ingredients of a recipe, but in this case, it might be some information, or it might be a culture. It might be something that would facilitate that process happening well. And then the cook's tips are, we call it what can go wrong. So it's the things that typically happen that shouldn't be happening. So it's like a red flag. And that's how it works. And then we go through each, if it's the doing the right things, if it's doing the right things, it's made up of 3 topics, which is having the strategy done well, having the governance that you need, and having the awareness that people know that this what the strategy really is. I mean, a strategy is another word that gets overplayed. I mean, at the end of the day, it's what the what our objectives are, how we see our future direction crystallized in something that should be easy to follow, not difficult to understand. And with security, people should know, as Jimmy would emphasize over and again, this is what the organization feels we need to focus upon. And we can't do everything. So it's the prioritization and the things that we want to tackle in the foreseeable future. So that's how it's laid out. The only other thing maybe to mention is that at the beginning, what we've done is highlight certain, so the course I don't like, I've tried to move away from some of the traditional, it's an argument, I know, but traditional language around education that educational guys thrive on, but none of the rest of us. It reminds me, Jimmy, of the days when we were both doing audit work, that we had our own language, you know, general controls and all these silly words, just to give ourselves a little bit of importance and actually perhaps to even stop people even knowing what we were doing. It's complete nonsense, you know. So the educational guys, I think, have overdone a secret language and talk about learning objectives and topics and things like that, you know. At the end of the day, we're just trying to explain to somebody something. So I just threw that out the window. And instead of having learning objectives, we have outcomes that the education hopefully will help someone or an organization pull off eventually. And so these questions are geared to the outcomes and help prioritize where some of this training might be useful. So, you know, if some of these questions sound like, that is something we've neglected, by just clicking on the button, you go straight to that section in the training. And the other thing I realized with training is it shouldn't be a one-off thing. It's a bit like, the analogy is like having a driver's manual for a car. You look into it when you need to. And so what we've done is basically provide this on a never-ending potential offering, you know, that people who sign up for this can go back to it whenever they like. And we can instantly update this. It's like a piece of software compared to LMSs and PowerPoints and official training classes. It can take years to get new versions launched. This literally, I do this in a second. If we want to, and people will get the new version, which makes currency very important because things change, you know. So anyway, I think that's probably enough, Mark, just to give people a taste.
That's great, Gary. Thanks.
Yeah.
It's always good to see these things in the flesh, and so people can get an idea of user experience. And I understand that this is a web-based thing, but you can also have an app on your phone, download it to your tablet, so it's, you can use this offline, which is great. So I think we'll move on to questions shortly, but first of all, just wanted to have a few of my own. Those in leadership now looking at this course, they might wonder how granular it is. Is this a course that executives can expect to run through and then know everything they need to know about keeping their organization secure?
Well, it's look, there's no such thing as everything you need to know. I mean, it's what we felt was the essentials. It's the 80-20 rule, that if you understand and apply this, you've probably reduced down to 20% the chances of things going wrong, because all the fundamentals would have been applied. And as we keep arguing, it's not rocket science, actually. A lot of this ought to be familiar territory for people who are reasonably experienced leaders, especially business-oriented people. And it's not something that they might have to create from scratch. It's almost like applying what they would normally do in the business on some normal business activity to something that's been called technology, and somehow they thought, well, maybe that's different. It's not.
Yeah.
So the content is limited to about 80 odd pages. It would normally take, if you went through the whole thing in one go, probably about 8 hours. But we don't think that's necessarily the way people should learn anyway. And it's something that they can look at from time to time, as I said before. But we think this is the essential basics. And oddly, no one else seems to have done this. It's the thing that drives me nuts. I can't understand it. And it's like, Jimmy, when we went back, the old COVID days, it's like, come on. Unfortunately, the COVID framework ended up still having a bit of a connotation of being something for the auditors. It was never, because it comes from an organization of those people, it's for me, it's just frustrating. I just would love people to grasp these things, because I reckon for a minimum amount of effort and cost, going back to the money that's being wasted, it's like a no-brainer. I mean, crumbs, this could save a lot of money for people.
Definitely. Yeah. I think it's
as well as being an advantage. Yeah.
I think it's really touching the key points and the key cornerstones. Not going too much into detail, because I think that's one of the good things of the security industry. We get lost in details every time we start. So I think that's why it's a very beneficial industry. But from a company steering perspective, from a governance perspective, it doesn't make sense to go into any detail. But I think having the key topics and the key things you just feel, I think that's all included and that's all there. Like the kid in the hospital, if it smells strange, then you would take action.
And it probably is strange, yeah.
Or if there's a strange sound, you would take action. If there's no light, you would take action. If everything goes well, it's fine. You don't have to be the biggest expert in hygiene in the hospital. You don't have to be the biggest expert in cyber hygiene in your company.
And Mark, maybe just to mention something that we added in recently, and it was actually Carolyn who kind of gave me the idea of this without realizing it, I think. So we created a 20-minute audio summary of the entire thing. And then I used ChatGPT to help me find case study examples of people who've done each of these elements well. And so the audio talks about, and it's a conversation between two people, obviously fictitiously, using AI tools again, that discuss the content of the course, using the actual course content, and then referencing in the dialogue. So company X, this is what they did, And so the hope is that someone might, at the very beginning, just listen to those 20 minutes and then realize, actually, this is doable. It's not rocket science, and then delve in a little bit more. And then they would go on to experts to get, to fix the nitty-gritty problems. But from a perspective of telling them why they want it done and how they want it done, just like you would if you had security in your house, you don't just ignore it completely and let someone get away with selling you all manner of alarm systems and fences and God knows what,
Okay. So what what advice would you give to senior executives on effectively collaborating with their IT and security teams? And does the training encourage communication between leadership and technical staff?
So, Jimmy, one thing I would say is, and I've seen this begin to happen, is there'll be some leaders who are so frustrated with the poor dialogue they are having with the current people. And this has been going on for a long time with IT departments, but it might also be with some security people or other experts they have, that they might knee-jerk, like in the old days of outsourcing everything, just say, okay, we'll do this on our own. And one way or the other, do it on their own. I've seen situations where they start hiring people into the business on their own, so they don't have to deal any longer with their colleagues. It's not very clever, really, because it's going to create even more friction, even more silos, even more annoyance, and even more broken links. So good leaders they're the ones who are steering the whole ship, and it's all about collaboration and teamwork. And look, and I think should perhaps put their hands up and say, well, look, to be honest, we haven't made these guys' life that easy either. It's just been a shared mistake. It's very easy to point fingers and criticize, but you've let go. You haven't taken ownership. It's the same thing back to the hospital and the doctor and the children and parents and kids. You can tell your kids, and now for me it's grandkids. You can tell the kids off over and over again, but did we do the right job in the first place of helping them to understand what needs to be done, or rewarding them for the best things they have done? So it seems obvious. It's culture again, and look, and the other thing that's been very interesting was out of COVID, and it became slogans. Better together. The whole COVID thing, if there was one nice part to COVID, it was that there was this feeling of working together took off. And one of the other things I discussed, and Jimmy, going back to audit days, when I was doing audit work all those years ago, we decided that finding was a forbidden word. It's opportunity. And so trying to stop criticizing, trying to stop pointing, talk about the past badly, is to talk about the future positively. That kind of cut. We emphasize this quite a bit in the training.
Yes, fully agree. And then there's also this common practice of just security experts submit a quarterly or annual report on the state of security, and then the feedback they receive is zero. I think it's not just something for the drawer; it's something to start a discussion, and not just read through the reports. It's to really encourage the people to bring some lights into these topics, and clearly say what are the priorities. Give feedback to, okay, I want to make our company more resilient. I can accept maybe breach of X, Y, or Z. This can happen. This might happen. We will have a plan B for X, Y, or Z. So to start a conversation, to give everyone the confidence that yes, security is important. It's maybe not the top priority of the organization, but it's considered as important, and also give back the trust that let's continue on a path that's a successful one, and work together with the security experts. And I think that's the best the leaders can do.
And Jimmy, and also I think what I've seen is that reporting, if it's properly rounded, so it's also celebrating successes. It can even mention things outside that have been done, and doesn't have to be boring and long-winded. It can even be a video, or it could be, a graphical thing. I think IT technical people generally have an engineering sort of tendency, at least historically they have, and it tends to be engineering speak, and when why do people not respond? Probably because it was boring to look at and of no value. I mean, years and years people have talked about this crazy IT departmental reports, that come out with all these graphics and percentages, and it's not the way. And I think again, there's a new wave, towards communicating differently. The whole Twitter thing taught us how to say 50 words in 5, So I think, it's communication is another big cultural aspect, and we emphasize that over and over again, also in these these classes that it's not a class in these learnings. It's again something the leaders can promote and encourage and say, this is what we want. We don't want any more stiff reports. Forget it, you know.
One thing is just making it more accessible to people.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember back when I used to work for a bank in the UK, we would have these tests that were sent to us periodically because you work in a bank, they're worried that you're going to start money laundering. And actually, these tests were very good at teaching you how to do money laundering, but they were just they were so dull. You know, there wasn't really much connection with what was going on in the real world of the company I was working for. So they told you what was kind of going on in the world at large, but it just wasn't really tied down to how it impacted me and the impact I had on my organization. So I think it's all in the language and yeah, the accessibility, and that's something that the course is good at showing, is that how this all kind of makes sense and relates to what you're doing.
Yeah.
I'll go over to some questions now. There's some in the comments and some in the question box, but there's one here from Abigail. She said that Gary made a comment about company secretaries and the role they play in safeguarding the documentation of other companies, which she didn't quite understand that assertion. So is that not a good thing to do? She's asking.
So look, first of all, I can't claim to understand fully the role of company secretaries. It's just something I had never really even thought about, you know. But so at this event I went to, and there's another one coming up that I'm going to go to, the discussion was that there needs to be someone attached to the board who is kind of responsible for protecting the interests of the company and making sure that the board do the right thing. So they're almost like a backup. And for organizations that don't have all the expertise, that they provide the expertise. So remind people of things that must be done. And so it depends on the quality of the company secretary person or the service. But what I found really interesting, and these guys were very sharp, you know, and using stories from elsewhere to not so much frighten the board members, but to wake them up, you know, to say, guys, you've got to take this thing seriously, because otherwise you're going to fall into the trap of other people, you know. It's not, and oftentimes they found that, especially in smaller organizations, that the board members didn't have the experience. You know, they were people who'd never been on a board before, or, you know, just got in that position because they were the founders of the company. In bigger companies, it's a different story. So this was, I guess, mostly looking at smaller companies, because they were the people who were attending. But that's what triggered my thinking here. It's something I'm going to look into more. So I'm in Zambia next month for another one of these events, and I'm going to try and find out some more, because it might even be something we could think about educating. So I hope that helps a little bit. Yeah.
And Jimmy, just going on from that, so looking at kind of functions managing their own security, do you have any comments on that, on how, you know, things can be centralized versus, you know, everyone looking after their own piece of the pie, the puzzle?
Yeah, I think that there's no silver bullet for that organization. So for some organizations, it might be fine if it's located in internal audit. Some might find it in some compliance function, some near a company secretary. It depends on the jurisdiction and the company culture. For our organization, it perfectly makes sense to have the security function as part of the IT function, because everything which is done with IT is done by this very organization. And we also work and live with a lot of trust. And we don't need this 4 eyes principle with internal audit and compliance and all these things. We just don't need that. That's just not part of our corporate culture, which for me perfectly makes sense. But if I compare us to a bank, there it perfectly makes sense to not combine that. So it depends on the culture of the organization where to put it. But I think always having the open doors for these experts is important.
I mean, I guess having a function that reports to a specific area, it just makes it a prime target to become a silo. And so these guys are just left to deal with everything, you know, that's related to that.
Yeah, it's a pro and con. So it's not just giving assurance to a supervisory board or to a board of directors. It's also motivating colleagues in IT or more technical functions to adopt good practices and make the world and the quality of the whole services a little bit better.
Right.
And if you place it here, it's bad for the other one and vice versa. So it has to be fitting to the corporate culture, as mentioned.
Okay. I've seen a comment here about how people fear security, and it'd be good to make it more kind of positive and proactive. And we were speaking earlier about Red Bull racing. You know, the cars, the better the brakes they have, the faster they can go. So how is it? How can we kind of change the perception of security to be one of something as an enabler? You know, if you've got your eyes on this, we can go further and faster.
With this enabling a better break, I can live with this metaphor, but business enablement through security, I don't believe in that. I think that's a made-up thing from security industry. So if you build firewalls, then you live from it. Then you create a business. If you're a bank, this certain level of trust that comes with technical security measures, I don't believe in that. I don't think this can be found somewhere in your books. That's inappropriate, I'd say.
Okay. I'm just looking down here at further comments. There's a question here. Are they correct that this course or curriculum will help sharpen the oversight or governance skills needed within a board from an information and governance perspective?
Well, I certainly hope so. I mean, it's not limited to the board, and we call it executives deliberately. So it's everyone who has a sort of senior leadership role. And actually, having discussed this now with quite a few people, I've decided to come to the conclusion that for security people, and in this particular case, for security people who have the motivation to help, get their leaders on board, if they understand what we put into this training, they would be able to discuss with their leaders what the leaders should be doing. You know, it's kind of ironic in a way. It's so I think. So what we're simply trying to do is help leaders do the right thing here. And so whoever might find this helpful to make that happen, the better. And one of the things we haven't, it's early days with all of this for us, but one of the things we foresaw in the future was that we could easily tailor this kind of thing for a particular company. So if it was felt that certain elements were particularly relevant for the board, we could separate that out, or we could brand things so that it seems to resonate with the language and the culture of the company itself, so that it feels like it's our training, not someone else's. So the honest answer is we're exploring this all the time and trying to make a breakthrough, because to be very honest with you, I've spent 40 years trying to crack this particular nut, and I'm running out of time. It's frustrating. We need we need to somehow fix this, because otherwise it's just going to drag on. We're going to get more and more mistakes being made, more and more money being wasted and lost, and because what drives me ultimately, and always has from the day I went, did computer science way back, was that technology has fantastic potential if done well. Every part of our life, and this is one particular aspect that has to be fixed, because it's going to get worse if we're not careful, because the technologies are getting more advanced. We're now AI. Where will it end? That the scope of technologies are so wide, but the principles here are exactly the same.
Yeah. I think
it could be someone just put a comment there about non-exec directors. Yeah, non-execs, everyone who could have an influence or should be having an influence here. So the people who are responsible for security, like Jimmy, the people who are responsible for running the organization, the execs, the people who are responsible for overseeing and steering the organization, the board, and the non-execs who are responsible for independently adding some value here and not being caught up with certain politics or whatever, all have a responsibility. And in my opinion, if they ignore this, they are simply going back to Mervyn King. Due diligence is not happening. and the skill to be a director and a leader isn't being applied. You know, you're not like the parent is not acting like a parent.
Yeah.
So all those people, I think, and what we're trying to do here is make it easy to understand, easy and accessible, and low cost. By the way, we can come on after the course or something. It's too much of this costs too much money, and so what we've tried to do is make it as accessible as possible in every way to all of those people.
I think of the training, the security training courses that we've looked at, this one is definitely the most accessible, I would say, for boards and people at that level, because it's in business language, it's in, you know, normal speak. It's not, there's no jargon involved, so it's much more easier for them to grasp. So I think that's one of the benefits of this course, and something that would make it valuable to people at that level. So I've just looked at the time. We're at the top of the hour, so we're going to have to round off there. If there are any more questions, then you're welcome to ping them in via email, and we can respond to those. The Good Governance Academy is delighted to have a discount available to it, so there'll be 20% off of this course for anyone that applies through the Good Governance Academy, and you can find the course on the Good Governance's website. For anyone that missed this session or wants to look back through it, this recording will be available on the YouTube channel, so you can see it there. But otherwise, I just want to say thanks, a massive thanks to Gary and Jimmy for joining us today. It was great just to hear your insights and to, you know, where the need for this course came from, as much as just going through the course. So we really appreciate your time. Thank you to the audience. We appreciate your support, and we hope to see you again next time. So thanks very much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.